Welcome, everyone. My name is Mayumi Brewster with the U.S. Census Bureau. I'd like to welcome everyone listening to today's podcast, Hidden Gems of Economic Surveys, where we're going to discuss data on governments, specifically 5-year data from the Census of Governments. Most people I encounter know the U.S. Census Bureau measures America's people, places, and economy. We provide a wide range of data to help you make data-driven decisions. The U.S. Census Bureau conducts more than 130 surveys and programs each year, releasing data biweekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, as well as an economic census and Census of Governments every 5 years, and other periodic reports. We provide data on various sectors of the economy, including public sector, manufacturing, retail trade, wholesale trade, and services. We could surely be here all day to talk about all the data tools, and resources we have available for you. However, we are focusing on the Census of Governments, a 5-year survey also known as COG. I'd like to introduce Stephen Owens, who is a public sector specialist in our economy-wide statistics division. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Mayumi.
So glad we're able to highlight your program. Today, we'll be focusing on a 5-year census, but in my introduction, I mentioned biweekly, monthly, annual, and periodic for both economic and government data as background. What's the difference between an economic indicator, an annual survey, and a 5-year census program?
Generally, for most sectors, the indicators, quarterly, annual, and 5-year census programs work together to measure a given part of the economy. For example, the indicator survey provides the most timely information, but isn't always at the finest level of detail as far as geography, products, etc. The annual survey adds more detail, such as adding information on finances or payroll, but on a more delayed basis. The 5-year census serves as the foundation due to the comprehensive coverage, but because of that granularity, takes the most time to process and release. The greater level of detail coincides with a larger sample.
Thanks for providing a good distinction between the different types of programs. The longer the time, our 5-year and annual surveys, the more details can be provided, while the more timely, our biweekly, monthly, and quarterly surveys provide just a snapshot of the industry. Great. Since we are focusing on the public sector program, when I hear public sector, the first things that come to mind are governmental services, public education, and maybe public transit with an emphasis on public. Can you tell me more about the public sector program?
In a nutshell, public sector programs provide information about state and local governments, such as the number of governments, how much governments spend, their income, the number of state and local government employees, and their payrolls.
Really? We provide information on how much governments spend and their income? It's good to see our data is not only comprehensive, but transparent. This seems like a lot in just one survey. Can you tell me more about this?
Yes, there are 2 major areas comprised of survey data that provide the full scope of the public sector of the economy. We have one survey that covers all the financial aspects of state and local governments, and one survey that covers the employment aspect of state and local governments. These surveys collectively provide all of the public sector data. Some examples of the data we collect on our finance survey include how much money governments levy for specific taxes such as sales, property, income, and even gas taxes. Additionally, we track government spending in functional detail such as how much governments spend on services like education, fire protection, highways, and the like. If you want to know how much debt the city or county you live in has accrued, we track that as well. Some examples of the data we collect on our employment survey include how many full-time and part-time employees the government has by government function, including the number of police officers, firefighters, and transit employees, as well as how much they are collectively paid.
That really makes it simple for me. There is a financial aspect and an employment aspect, but collectively provides all public sector data. Can you explain how this relates to the Census of Governments and the annual surveys?
Keeping it simple, the Census of Governments collects the same data as the annual surveys. However, the Census of Governments also collects data for all governments, approximately 90,000, while the annual data are obtained from a sample of 12 to 25,000 local governments.
Wow, all local governments? So that we understand the magnitude of this, what do you mean by local governments? Can you provide some examples?
Sure. The Census of Governments classifies local governments into 5 categories, namely county, municipal, township, school district, and special district governments that often perform a specific function, such as fire districts and library districts.
That's a lot of local entities to collect data from, and we haven't even touched on the state governments. With so many state and local entities, how are you able to collect this data?
Yes, there are only 50 state governments, and data for those is mostly obtained by administrative records provided by the states. Most of the data collected is from local governments. The data are collected via a combination of methods, including direct responses by the local governments over the internet, local government administrative records provided by the states, and administrative records obtained from the local governments themselves.
Being able to obtain most data via administrative records makes data collection easier from state governments. However, with the increased concern of fraud and inadvertently giving out personal information, especially when it relates to finances and employment, data collection can be difficult. So, how would a respondent know the survey is legitimate and secure?
Recently, we've instituted a new response portal which allows respondents to provide us with information in a totally secure manner. Additionally, we never ask a respondent for personal information. All of the data we ask for is in the public domain. We never ask for individual employee information such as Social Security numbers and the like.
Okay, now that we know the information is secure, what are some ways to increase response?
To increase response, we actively reach out to many membership organizations that include our target respondents. We do this through a variety of methods, including conference attendance, webinars, and providing promotional materials for the Census of Governments. The real key to increasing responses is to convey the value of our data to our potential respondents. In fact, we hope that activities such as this podcast will help get the message out.
I have learned so much thus far. So once respondents know they have a legitimate survey, I'm sure there's others who feel it's a lot of work to complete our surveys. How do you all reduce the respondent burden?
We are always looking for new administrative record sources to reduce respondent burden. We are also actively customizing some of our questionnaires by moving away from the one-size-fits-all model to collecting data that specifically applies to a particular group of respondents. Finally, we are actively changing content to better align with the way respondents keep their records.
That makes sense given our current environment. We want to ensure we are providing useful, timely data. However, we want local and state entities to respond. Can you share what's coming out next from your area?
We mailed out the Census Governments Finance in November. We hope to start releasing actual 2022 Census Governments data in June of 2023, beginning with the employment and payroll data.
Wow, we are now conducting the 2022 Census of Governments with mailouts that occurred last month. Okay, since 2022 is the most recent, how far back does the data go?
The modern-day Census of Governments began in 1957. In addition, we have some older reports, but they tend to focus on certain data aspects in a limited number of governments. These data can be valuable to researchers, but there can be some compatibility issues with modern census statistics.
That's pretty interesting. Many users like to see historical data to view trends over time, and with the data going back to 1957, they have decades of data to compare. Have you noticed any interesting trends in the data?
Yes, actually over time several interesting trends have arisen in the data. For example, school district consolidation and the death of the one-room schoolhouse have driven down the number of school districts markedly over time. At the same time, special district governments have increased substantially in number. Our data often track closely with the business economy, and various recessions over time can be seen in our data, albeit often on a somewhat delayed basis.
Wait, recessions show up in our data? We are talking about finances and employment, so I can see the relation. What about natural disasters and more recently the pandemic? How would that data show up in the 2022 Census of Governments?
Oftentimes, the effect of natural disasters are reflected in our data. For example, we temporarily saw significant changes in both employment and finance data in the affected areas when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. Since the enactment of Medicaid in 1965, public welfare has gone from being a relatively minor state function to dwarfing all other state services in the modern day. Public pension data show the shift from conservative investments to more risky endeavors as state and local pension systems attempt to address growing unfunded liabilities. Most recently, the pandemic has started to show up in our data in the form of increased federal aid and state and local spending on healthcare.
Amazing. This further shows the importance of this data. Can you tell me who uses this data?
Sure, these data are widely used by federal, state, and local legislators and policymakers to understand what's going on in the public sector of the economy. For example, the Bureau of Economic Analysis uses these data for inputs into the gross domestic product, and the Federal Reserve uses it in its flow of funds report. In fact, government expenditures alone make up almost 20% of the gross domestic product. State and local governments often use the data to compare themselves to other similar governments.
Only governments and policymakers? What about the non-government individuals? How could they use the data?
The data are frequently used in academia and by the news media. In addition, municipal bond rating agencies often factor the data into their bond rating formulae.
Nice. So policymakers, local and state legislators, and even researchers use this data. Anything new or on the horizon you would like to share?
We are always looking to keep our data relevant to what is going on in today's economy and also reduce respondent burden. For example, with the legalization of cannabis by some states, we are now starting to collect data on taxes collected from the cannabis industry in those specific states. We are currently working with a team of data scientists to automate the collection of some of our tax and other administrative records data. We have recently made some content changes to our finance survey that better align with how state and local governments keep their records. We are hoping that this will reduce response burden while increasing data quality. We are also developing dynamic collection instruments to reduce burden on respondents, meaning we only ask questions that are relevant to them.
Awesome. Thanks for this great overview of the Census of Governments. This is definitely an exceptional source for those looking to learn more about the public sector program. In addition, with the historical information found on the Census Bureau's website, you can look at historical trends in and across different sectors. So just to summarize, first, Census of Governments is collected every 5 years and covers financial and employment aspects of all state and local governments, with the exception of federal governments. Secondly, the data goes back as far as 1957, which provides trends over decades. And lastly, we just mailed out the Census of Governments Finance in November and plan to release employment and payroll data in June of 2023. If you found today's podcast informative and helpful and you would like to learn more, please visit us at www.census.gov. If you want to learn more about public sector and Census of Governments data, please visit www.census.gov/GOVS. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to sharing more with you very soon.